Welcome to the Hindu Daily.
It is great to be here. We have, well, a pretty packed desk today. I'm counting 11 different stories we need to get through.
It's a lot. It really is. But as I was reading through them, I noticed this really interesting thread that seems to connect almost all of them.
Oh, yeah. What's that?
It's all about systems,
Hmm?
How we design them. And it doesn't matter if it's a federal government or our financial architecture or even the genetic code in our cells.
I see what you mean. It's about the design versus the reality.
Exactly. It's about what happens when these perfectly designed systems on paper slam into the real world. A world with, say, a turtle nesting site in Nicobar, or a migrant worker in the Gulf, or a small business trying to get a loan.
That's the perfect frame for today. We are looking at the friction between the plan and the messy reality. And I think there's no better place to start than with our first story, which is all about that friction.
Let's do it. We're starting on the front page with the Great Nicobar Strategic Mega Project. This has been a huge story for a while, but we have a major update.
We do. The National Green Tribunal, the NGT, has officially given it the green light.
So it's a go.
It looks that way. The NGT bench has cleared the path for this, and it's a 92,000 crore rupee project. They've stated, and this is the key part, that they found no valid ground to interfere with the environmental clearance that was granted back in 2022.
Okay. Before we get into the legal weeds here, let's just paint a picture of what this mega project actually is. Because infrastructure initiative sounds so sterile.
It does.
We're talking about a massive transshipment port, an international airport, a new power plant, and a huge township.
It's not just an infrastructure project. They're effectively building a new city, a new strategic hub, sort of like a Singapore right in the middle of a pristine and very fragile ecosystem.
A rainforest ecosystem. And that's why the objections have been so fierce, right? You've got the indigenous Shompen and Nicobarese tribes living there.
Who have lived there for centuries. And then you have some of the most sensitive biodiversity on the entire planet. We're talking about crucial leatherback turtle nesting sites and vast coral reefs.
So, given all that, how did the NGT justify this? Did they just say, tough luck for the turtles, we need a port?
Huh? Well, not in those exact words, but you're not that far off. The entire ruling seems to hinge on two words: strategic importance.
Strategic importance.
Yes. The bench looked at the location, which overlooks one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world, and they decided that, given the national importance of the project, what was needed was a, quote, balanced approach.
Ah, the balanced approach. That's one of those phrases that sounds very reasonable, but often means one side is about to lose out pretty badly.
And in this case, the NGT was very clear about what that balance meant. They said, and I'm paraphrasing here, that development at such a critical location cannot be stopped just because of apprehension.
It's apprehension. But these weren't just vague feelings. The environmental groups had specific complaints, especially about the data, didn't they? The high-powered committee was supposed to study the dangers to the coral reefs.
They were, and the NGT's position is that these issues have been, quote, dealt with. But this is where it gets really contentious.
So,
The applicants who bought the case argued that the whole environmental impact assessment was fundamentally flawed
why?
because the data was only collected for one season.
Wait, one season, hold on. For a project of this scale, isn't the standard practice to collect data over 3 seasons? To see the full annual cycle?
Absolutely. That's the scientific standard. You need a full year to understand migration patterns, weather changes, breeding seasons, everything.
So how did the government get around that?
The government's counterargument, which the NGT accepted, was that since this specific site has, and this is their term, no high erosion, the 3-season data requirement wasn't strictly necessary.
That seems like a really convenient conclusion. We don't think there's erosion, so we don't need to spend a full year counting the animals.
It's a significant leap. The NGT's ruling is that the doubt from the applicants was expelled by the conditions that are already part of the clearance. They've told the Environment Ministry to ensure strict compliance.
What does that mean in practice? For the corals, for instance.
For the corals, they've mandated regeneration using proven scientific methods.
Is that even a thing? Can you really use a proven scientific method to regenerate a complex coral reef after you've dredged a channel and built a massive port right next to it? I thought they were basically gone once they're gone.
That is the multi-billion rupee question, isn't it? The science on large-scale reef restoration is Well, it's very much in its infancy. It's incredibly difficult. But the legal ruling says, go ahead, build it, but you are legally on the hook to fix whatever you break.
And what about the turtles, the leatherbacks?
For them, the ministry has been tasked with making sure the shoreline is protected so that their nesting sites aren't lost to, you guessed it, erosion.
The same erosion they said wasn't a big deal.
The very same.
It feels like we're trying to write laws for nature, telling it to work around our construction schedule.
That's a very good way of putting it. And we should be clear, this isn't the final word. While the environmental clearance is settled for now, the forest clearance part of it, which directly impacts the ancestral lands of the Shompen and Nicobarese, that's still being challenged in the Calcutta High Court.
So the fight isn't over, but the bulldozers are warming up.
They're one big step closer.
This is a perfect example of that tension we talked about. National strategy versus local reality. And that brings us perfectly to the editorial section. There's a piece here called Right-Sizing the Republic. It takes that exact same tension, center versus local, and applies it to the entire government of India.
Yes, this is a really sharp piece on Indian federalism. The central argument is that our constitution, by its very design, has a powerful centralizing bias. And over the decades, New Delhi has fallen into a habit of trying to micromanage absolutely everything.
It can definitely feel that way. But was it always meant to be like this? Why was the system designed with such a bias in the first place?
You have to go back to the context of the time. Think about 1947, 1950. The country was born out of the trauma of partition.
Right.
There were hundreds of princely states that had to be brought into the fold, so there was this very real, very existential fear that India could just break apart.
So centralization was a survival strategy. You hold the reins tight so the whole thing doesn't fly apart.
Precisely. It was seen as an absolute necessity for national unity. But the argument in this editorial is that what was a necessity in 1950 has become a bad habit in 2026.
A counterproductive habit.
Exactly. The piece quotes K. Santhanam, who was a major figure in the Constituent Assembly. And he warned, even back then, that the strength of the union doesn't come from doing everything itself. It comes from sticking to the tasks that truly belong to the center.
That's a great point. It's the difference between being a strong leader and just being a micromanager.
That's the perfect analogy. The editorial paints this picture of a central government trying to supervise everything from, launching rockets into space down to rural sanitation programs.
And when you stretch yourself that thin, you can't do anything well.
You diminish your own effectiveness. You end up with these huge central ministries that are basically just duplicating the work that state governments are already supposed to be doing.
And that must lead to that one-size-fits-all problem we always hear about.
It's the inevitable result. You get these rigid, templated schemes cooked up in a Delhi office that completely ignore the realities on the ground. A policy that makes sense for the agricultural landscape of Punjab could be a total disaster in the coastal ecology of Kerala.
Or a labor market policy for a highly industrialized state like Maharashtra just won't work in a state like Bihar.
Exactly. The local context is lost.
So the argument here isn't about weakening the center. It's about right-sizing it, as the title says.
Yes. It's not about making the center weaker. It's about making it smarter. And part of that is recognizing that states are actually incredible laboratories for innovation.
Can you give an example?
Think of the most successful national schemes. The midday meal scheme, a cornerstone of our education and nutrition policy. That didn't start in Delhi.
It started in Tamil Nadu, right?
It did. And the employment guarantee scheme that became MGNRE-GA, that started as a state-level initiative in Maharashtra. Kerala's public health models have been adopted nationally. The best ideas often bubble up from the states.
So decentralization can actually lead to better national policy in the end.
That's the core argument. The article closes by mentioning a recent report submitted to the Tamil Nadu government, chaired by Justice Kurian Joseph. And their vision is for a new constitutional settlement, one where the union is strong because it's focused on the big picture.
And the states are strong because they are trusted to handle everything else.
Focus and trust. It's a compelling vision.
It really is.
Yeah.
Now let's stick with this theme of structural flaws, but pivot to our financial system. The next editorial is titled Beyond the Bank.
Right. This piece dives into a fundamental problem with how India funds its growth. For too long, we've had this deep structural reliance on banks for long-term funding, and the new budget, 2026, is finally trying to tackle that.
Okay, explain that reliance for me. Banks lend money. That's what they do. So what's the problem if they're funding a new highway or a port?
The problem isn't the lending itself, it's the mismatch in timelines. Economists call it a maturity mismatch.
Maturity mismatch.
Think about where a bank gets its money from. It's from us, right? Our savings accounts, our fixed deposits, that's all short-term money. You might want to pull your savings out tomorrow to pay for an emergency.
Of course. I expect it to be there when I need it.
Exactly. But what if the bank has taken your short-term savings and lent it out to a company building a power plant? That money is now locked up for 15, maybe 20 years?
I see the problem. My money is now a concrete pillar in a bridge somewhere, and I can't get it back.
That's the core of the issue. And this problem is made so much worse in India because our corporate bond market is incredibly shallow.
How shallow are we talking?
Well, in the US, the corporate bond market is about 80% of GDP. In China, it's around 55%. In India, it's a tiny 15 to 16% of GDP.
Wow, that's a huge difference. So because companies can't easily raise money by selling long-term bonds, they have no choice but to go to the banks.
They do. And so the banks have become, as the article puts it, the warehouse for risk. And when these big long-term infrastructure projects inevitably hit delays or run into problems...
Losses all land on the bank's balance sheet.
Exactly. And since so many of our big lenders are public sector banks, who ultimately has to bail them out?
The taxpayer, you and me.
Correct. The article points out that since 2017 alone, the government has had to inject over 3.2 lakh crore rupees to recapitalize these banks. The author calls this a hidden tax.
A hidden tax.
Yeah.
That's a powerful way to put it. We're basically using public money to cover private sector losses because our financial plumbing is broken.
That's it. So the new budget is trying to fix that plumbing. It wants to shift the risk away from the banks and onto the markets where it belongs.
How does it plan to do that?
A few key proposals. Creating a new infrastructure risk guarantee fund, for one. Pushing for market making in corporate bonds to create more liquidity. And encouraging things like real estate investment trusts or REITs.
So the goal is to create more avenues for long-term investors, like pension funds or insurance companies, to directly fund these projects.
Precisely. Let the risk be priced and distributed by investors who actually have a 20-year horizon, instead of dumping it all on a bank that needs to be able to pay back its depositors tomorrow.
Let the market do its job. Okay, let's stay on infrastructure, but look at it from a different angle in the opinion section. We hear this all the time. Building green is just too expensive. We can't afford to save the planet because we need to build roads first. But this piece argues that's a complete myth.
Yes, this is a really important article about green steel. We all know the steel industry is one of the biggest carbon emitters. If India has any hope of hitting our net zero target by 2070, we have to decarbonize steel production.
But there's always the green premium, right? The idea that green steel costs a fortune more. If I'm a contractor building a bridge and you tell me the green steel is 30% more expensive, I'm going to look at my budget and say, no way.
That's the immediate, intuitive reaction. But this article does the math, and the results are actually pretty shocking. Let me ask you this. In a huge infrastructure project, like a major highway or a large bridge, what percentage of the total project cost do you think is just the steel?
That's a good question. It's a steel bridge, so
Yeah.
a lot. Maybe 40, 50%.
It's surprisingly low. It's only about 18%.
Only 18. Wow.
Yeah. The vast majority of the cost is things like land acquisition, labor, cement, machinery, all the engineering work. The steel itself is a relatively small slice of the pie.
Okay, I think I see where this is going.
So let's do the math again. If steel is only 18% of the total cost and you
Right.
increase the price of just that steel by 30%.
The total project cost doesn't go up by 30%. It goes up by, what, about 5.5%?
Exactly. A roughly 5.5% increase, that's much more manageable. And the article points out that for a highway project specifically, the total budget increase is only about 1.1%.
1.1%. That's practically a rounding error in a project of that size.
The author calls it a manageable increment.
So we're not avoiding green steel because it would bankrupt our infrastructure plans. We're avoiding it more because of perception and old habits.
That seems to be the argument, perception and inertia. And the article reframes that small cost increase. It says we shouldn't see that 1.1% as a cost at all. We should see it as an insurance premium.
Insurance. Insurance against what?
Against future carbon tariffs. Look at what the European Union is doing with its carbon border adjustment mechanism, the CBAM.
Right. They're going to start taxing imports based on their carbon footprint.
Very soon. If we want to keep exporting our products globally, we're going to face heavy taxes on their carbon content. So by paying a tiny premium now to build our own domestic green steel industry, India is basically ensuring its future export competitiveness.
That is a very smart way to look at it. But okay, there's still a practical problem. I'm the procurement officer. I've agreed to plunk extra 1%. How do I know the steel that shows up on my site is actually green? Greenwashing is a huge problem.
It is. The article calls it the trust deficit. And the solution proposed is surprisingly simple and low-tech.
What is it?
A star rating system, 3, 4, 5 stars, just like for appliances, linked to a QR code on every beam of steel. It uses the existing quality control systems. You just scan the code with your phone and you see the green rating.
Simple and effective. And I'm guessing the government has to take the lead here.
It has to. The government is by far the single biggest buyer of steel in the country. If the government mandates green procurement for its projects, it creates a massive stable market overnight. The argument is, if you're going to use public money to subsidize green hydrogen production through PLI schemes, then you should also be the anchor customer buying the green steel made with that hydrogen.
You have to connect the dots. Put your money where your policy is. Okay, speaking of exports in global markets, let's move on to textiles. There's a huge shift happening in the global apparel trade, and it centers on India and our neighbor, Bangladesh.
This is a really fascinating story about opportunity, but also about the pretty ruthless logic of international trade rules. For the better part of a decade, Bangladesh has been, frankly, eating India's lunch in the textile sector, especially in the EU market.
They dominate it.
They do. But two huge things are about to happen that could completely change the game. First is the potential India-EU free trade agreement. And the second, and this is the big one, is that Bangladesh is about to graduate.
Graduate? What do you mean?
In 2029, Bangladesh is set to lose its official status as a least developed country, or LDC. That status is what currently gives them duty-free, quota-free access to the European market.
Ah, so that advantage is going away.
It is, and when it does, a new set of rules will kick in. And the specific rule that could change everything is something called double transformation.
That sounds very technical. Break that down for me.
It's actually not as complicated as it sounds. To get duty-free access under the EU's new system, they require that the product undergoes two substantial changes inside the exporting country. So for a shirt, you have to perform transformation 1, taking the fiber and making the yarn or fabric. And then you have to perform transformation 2, taking that fabric and making the finished garment.
So you have to make the cloth, and you have to make the shirt, all in the same country.
You've got it. And this is where Bangladesh has a huge structural problem. They are not vertically integrated. They import a massive amount of their fabric, a lot of it from China or even from India. Then they just do the cutting and stitching. They only perform one transformation.
So they won't qualify for the tax break anymore.
It's very likely they won't. But India, on the other hand, we grow our own cotton, we spin our own yarn, we weave our own fabric, and then we stitch the shirt. We are vertically integrated from farm to fashion. We fit the double transformation rule perfectly.
So the whole playing field is about to tilt back in our favor.
It could be a massive shift. Think about it. Right now, Bangladesh pays 0 tariffs to export to the EU, while India pays around 12%. After 2029, and if we get our FTA, those numbers could completely flip. We could be paying 0 while they face the 12% tariff.
That's a game changer. But the article says we can't just sit back and expect the orders to roll in, right?
No, absolutely not. It's a huge warning. Our exports have actually been shrinking. The data is stark. Bangladesh's share of the EU knitwear market went from 6% to 26%, while ours dropped down to just over 4%.
So what's the problem?
We have our own issues. Our logistics are inefficient, our power costs are too high, our prices are just not competitive, the opportunity is coming. But the article is very clear that we need a coherent, focused industrial policy to actually grab it. The door is creaking open, but we still have to be strong enough to push it and walk through.
An opportunity we need to be ready for. All right, let's pivot from stitching shirts to, well, stitching DNA. We're heading to the science section, and there's a breakthrough here called PERT that honestly sounds like it's straight out of science fiction.
This is genuinely mind-bending stuff. It's a new technique to fix a specific category of genetic errors called nonsense mutations.
Okay. Nonsense mutation. Give me a simple analogy. It sounds like a typo in an email.
That's a perfect analogy. That's exactly what it is. Your DNA is the instruction manual for building all the proteins your body needs to function. A nonsense mutation is like a typo that accidentally inserts a period or a stop sign right in the middle of a sentence.
So the cell's machinery is reading the instructions to build a protein, it hits this premature stop sign, and it just stops.
It just stops. The protein is left incomplete, truncated, and usually completely useless. And this single type of error is responsible for about 25% of all inherited genetic diseases. Things like cystic fibrosis, Batten disease, and many others.
A huge number of diseases. So how does this new technique, PERT, fix it? Does it go in with a tiny eraser and remove the premature period?
That's the traditional approach of gene editing, trying to fix the mistake in the DNA itself. But PERT is much more clever. It's different. It doesn't even touch the faulty gene.
It doesn't. So what does it do?
Instead of editing the instruction manual, it hacks the translator.
The translator.
Right. So inside your cells, you have these molecules called tRNA. Their job is to read the DNA code and bring the right amino acid, the right building block for the protein. What these researchers did was they reprogrammed one of these tRNA molecules. They taught it to ignore that specific stop typo.
And to just insert a regular amino acid instead and keep going.
Exactly. It essentially reads through the stop sign. That's why it's called prime editing mediated read-through, or PERT.
That's brilliant. And the beauty of that is that it's a universal patch, isn't it? You don't have to design a brand new therapy for every single patient with their unique mutation.
That's the holy grail here. You just use this one reprogrammed tRNA to override all these different nonsense mutations.
So the big question, does it actually work in a living being?
They tested it. They used mice that have a model of Hurler syndrome, which is a devastating genetic disease. And the treatment restored somewhere between 1.7 and 7% of the normal enzyme activity.
7%. That doesn't sound like a lot. Is that enough to make a difference?
For many of these genetic diseases, it's a huge deal. You often don't need to get back to 100% function. Even a small increase in the correct protein, 5 or 10%, can be enough to dramatically reduce the severity of the symptoms and change a patient's life.
Okay, that makes sense. But what about safety? This is what I'm worried about. If you're teaching the cell to ignore stop signs, what's to prevent it from ignoring the real stop signs at the actual end of the protein? Couldn't you end up with these giant malformed runaway proteins?
That was the #1 concern. That was the biggest fear. But the study showed something really remarkable. The edited tRNA was somehow selective. It was much better at ignoring the bad stop signals caused by the disease, but it still, for the most part, respected the real natural stop signals at the end of the gene. It's not perfect yet, but it's a massive step towards a therapy that could potentially treat thousands of different diseases with a single tool.
Truly incredible. Okay, from the microscopic code of life, let's zoom all the way out to the massive and often messy code of society. We're moving to the text and context section. And there's a story here about the census and a group of people called the Denotified and Nomadic tribes, or DNTs.
This is a really powerful story about what it means to be invisible to the state. The government has made a promise to finally count the DNTs in the upcoming 2027 census, in the second phase of it. But the community leaders are, to put it mildly, skeptical. And they have very good reason to be.
Let's start with the basics. Who exactly are the Denotified and Nomadic tribes?
To understand who they are, you have to understand a really dark piece of colonial history. In 1871, the British administration passed something called the Criminal Tribes Act.
The Criminal Tribes Act.
Yes. It literally branded entire communities, hundreds of them, as born criminals, genetically addicted to crime.
That's horrifying. The state officially labeling people as criminals from birth?
It is. Now, in 1952, independent India repealed that act and denotified these tribes. That's where the name comes from. But the stigma, the prejudice, it never went away. In many places, they were simply relabeled under new laws as habitual offenders.
And what does this have to do with the census today? Why is getting counted so critical for them?
Because right now, on paper, they barely exist. There's no single category for them. They're scattered all over the place. Some communities are listed as scheduled castes, some as scheduled tribes, others as OBCs, and a huge number aren't listed anywhere at all.
So without a specific column for DNT in the census form, there's no way to know how many people there are, where they live, what their conditions are.
You've hit the nail on the head. And if you don't exist in the data, you don't exist in the budget, it has real-world consequences.
How so?
There's a specific welfare scheme for them called SEED with a 200 crore rupee budget. It's failing. A huge amount of that money goes unspent every year.
But why, if the money is there?
It's a bureaucratic nightmare, a perfect catch-22. To get the benefits from the scheme, a person needs to produce a DNT certificate. But when they go to the local officials to get the certificate, the officials say they can't issue one because there's no official list or census data to prove that the person belongs to a DNT community.
Wow, so the government is demanding proof that the government itself refuses to create.
It is Kafkaesque. You can't get the help because you can't prove who you are because the system designed to help you has made you invisible.
And the community has its own narrative about this history, right? They argue they were labeled criminals for a very different reason.
Yes. Their argument is that they weren't criminals at all. They were patriots. They were communities that fiercely resisted British colonial rule and other foreign invaders, and this branding was the colonial power's way of punishing and controlling them. They want their history reclaimed, and they want their numbers counted so they can finally access their rights.
They want visibility. Speaking of making things visible, let's talk about a visible change in our cities. Our next piece is on district cooling. It sounds futuristic.
It does, but it's actually a very practical, old idea that's becoming more and more relevant in a warming world. We're all used to thinking of air conditioning as, a separate box or unit in every room or every building. District cooling completely flips that idea on its head. Think of it as cooling as a service.
Like a public utility, the way we get water or electricity.
Exactly like that. Instead of thousands of individual AC units, you have one massive, hyper-efficient central plant for an entire district. This plant chills huge volumes of water, and then that chilled water is pumped through a network of super-insulated underground pipes to every building in the area, offices, malls, apartment buildings.
And the buildings just tap into that cold water.
They do. They use it to run their internal air handling units to cool the air, and then the now warmer water is piped back to the central plant to be chilled again.
It sounds complex. Why go to all that trouble? Is it really that much better than everyone just having their own AC?
It's orders of magnitude better. First, efficiency. It can cut electricity consumption for cooling by 30 to 50%. It also reduces refrigerant leaks, and those are potent greenhouse gases, by as much as 80%. But the real genius of the system is something called thermal storage.
Thermal storage, what's that?
Think about when electricity is the cheapest and when the power grid has the most spare capacity.
Late at night.
Right. So the central cooling plant can run at full blast all night long when power is cheap and use that energy not just to chill water, but to make enormous tanks of ice.
So they're storing the coolness.
They're literally storing it. Then, during the peak heat of the afternoon, when electricity is expensive and the grid is strained to its breaking point, they can actually turn off their massive chillers. They just circulate the water that's being cooled by melting the ice they made last night.
That's brilliant. It completely flattens the peak demand on the grid. Are we seeing this in India?
We are. It makes the most sense in new high-density developments. Gift City in Gujarat is the poster child for this. Airports, new IT parks, special economic zones, they're all adopting it. An analysis for Gift City suggested that if it's fully deployed, it could save over 6,000 megawatts of peak power demand.
That's a huge number. So what's the catch? Why isn't every city doing this?
The main hurdle is the business model. It usually relies on something called a demand charge. It means customers, so the building owners, have to contract and pay for a certain peak cooling capacity, whether they end up using all of it or not.
So it's like paying for a mobile data plan. You pay for 10 gigabytes even if you only use 5.
Exactly. And if a developer overestimates their building's cooling needs and gets locked into a long-term contract, they can end up overpaying significantly. That scares some people off. It requires very careful, very precise planning and right-sizing of the contracts to work perfectly.
From cooling systems to overheated markets. Let's head to the business section. There is so much noise online, everywhere you look, about the death of the dollar.
The dollar debasement trade, yes. It's a constant narrative. You see it from crypto proponents, from people who advocate buying gold. The idea is that the U.S. dollar is on the verge of collapse because of U.S. debt and money printing. But the source we're looking at today calls this whole idea a mirage.
A mirage. So the dollar's actually doing fine.
Well, the dollar as a currency is surprisingly robust. If you look at its value against the euro, for instance, it's been remarkably stable for the last decade. The expert in this piece uses a specific metric called convenience yield.
Okay, can you explain that in simple terms?
Sure. It's basically a measure of how much investors prefer holding the real physical asset versus a synthetic version of it. It's a proxy for trust and demand. And for the US dollar, the convenience yield is still positive. people around the world still want to hold actual dollars. They see it as safe and liquid.
So if the dollar isn't the problem, where's all this market panic coming from?
The panic is real, the article argues, but it's been misidentified. The problem isn't the dollar. The problem is with U.S. Treasuries.
The bonds. U.S. government debt.
Exactly. The convenience yield for U.S. Treasuries, especially when you compare them to, say, German government bonds, has recently turned negative.
What does that mean?
It means investors are getting nervous. But they're not nervous about the currency itself. They're nervous about the U.S. fiscal situation, the sheer amount of debt. They're becoming wary of the bond market, not the dollar. The risk is being misdiagnosed.
That's a really important distinction. It's not that the money is becoming worthless. It's that the government's promised to pay you back. The IOU is starting to look a little shaky.
That's a perfect summary. The real stress isn't in the currency exchange, it's in the deep plumbing of the global debt market.
Fascinating. Let's look at another huge economy that's trying to pivot its entire strategy, China. We always think of China as the factory of the world, but this next story suggests they're trying to become the ski resort of the world.
It's a really telling story about their economic transition. It centers on a man named Luo Lu, who built a ski resort called Wanlong, north of Beijing, more than 20 years ago. And for most of those years, he had more staff than he had customers. He was just bleeding money.
I can imagine. So what changed?
Two things. The 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics created a huge surge in interest. And then, after the COVID lockdowns ended, people were desperate for domestic travel and leisure. Suddenly, his resort is not just surviving, it's profitable.
And the Chinese government noticed.
They absolutely did. They've latched onto this and are now promoting what they call the ice and snow economy. The official projections are that it will grow to 1.5 trillion yuan by 2030.
Why this big push for ski resorts and tourism now?
It's because Beijing knows the old model is running out of steam. They've built all the roads, all the factories, all the apartment blocks they need, and in many cases, far more. That kind of investment just isn't paying off anymore, so they desperately need to pivot to service-led growth. Things like tourism, sports, and elderly care.
But there's a huge risk here, isn't there? It sounds a lot like the Ghost City problem all over again.
You've put your finger right on it. The expert quoted in the article warns that China is basically applying its old, state-led industrial playbook, build it and they will come, to the service sector. They're pouring concrete for ski lifts and luxury hotels, just like they used to for steel mills.
But building a ski resort is one thing.
Right.
Do people actually have the disposable income to go skiing regularly?
That is the 1.5 trillion yuan question. That's the bottleneck. Service consumption in China is still only about 46% of their GDP. In the U.S., it's over 70%. Unless household incomes rise significantly, you're going to end up with beautiful, empty, world-class ski resorts. You can build the supply, but you can't use a construction crane to build consumer demand.
A real cautionary tale. And speaking of economic models that come at a high price, we have to end our deep dive today with the final story from the foreign section. It's about Nepal, and it's a tough one.
This was, without a doubt, the most difficult and moving story to read in the whole stack today. It's about the staggering human price of Nepal's remittance-based economy.
It opens with just a devastating image, doesn't it? A coffin being unloaded at the Kathmandu airport.
It does. The body of a man named Rudra Bahadur Kami returning home in a box. And the article immediately points out that this is not a rare event. This is the daily routine. Every single day, 3 to 4 coffins carrying the bodies of migrant workers arrive at Tribhuvan International Airport.
3 to 4 a day. That's just a staggering number to comprehend.
It is, and yet the entire Nepali economy has become addicted to this outflow of its own people. There are about 2.5 million Nepalese working abroad. That's 7.5% of the country's population. And the money they send home, the remittances, makes up 1/3 of the nation's GDP.
1/3. So the country is literally being kept afloat by the money sent back by these workers.
It is. And the government is accused of, essentially, treating its own citizens like an export commodity. Instead of building a robust domestic industry, the main export has become fathers, sons, and brothers, mostly to the Gulf states and Malaysia.
And the article details how systemic the exploitation is.
It describes a recruitment mafia. Workers are forced to pay illegal fees, sometimes 30 or 40 times the official government rate, just to get a job. They're promised one kind of work, say, cleaning a swimming pool, and they arrive to find themselves trapped as domestic servants or doing dangerous construction work. Their passports are often confiscated, they're trapped.
And the final bitter irony that the article points out is that there's an election coming up in Nepal, March 5th.
Yes. And you would think that these 2.5 million people, the ones single-handedly propping up the entire economy, would be the most crucial voting bloc.
But they have no way to vote.
None. The Electoral Commission has made no provisions for postal voting or any kind of absentee ballot for them, so the very people who are funding the nation are given absolutely no voice in deciding its future. They are essential to the economy, but completely invisible to the democracy.
That is a truly sobering note to end on. From the grand strategic plans in Nicobar, through the chemistry of green steel and the biology of gene editing, all the way to the silent tragedy unfolding daily at the Kathmandu airport. We've really seen the systems that run our world and the people who get caught inside them.
It's a powerful reminder, isn't it, that every policy, every line of code, every budget allocation, whether it's for a census column, a ski resort, or a trade agreement, ultimately lands on a human life. The details really, really matter.
They certainly do. Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.